everyone, it's Jan from Jan Plans Things, and welcome to my Plan With Me video for October week 2. So I hope you're all doing okay this week. I'm a little bit tired. I've had a lot of work to do in real life in my architecture job, but otherwise I've been busy doing Inktober and everything, and some of you have been following my drawings on Instagram, so I'm trying to get those done as much as I can. I'll see if I can finish the month. So this week I'm following on from my woodland mushrooms theme. What you saw me just earlier paint with was masking fluid. That's the Dalla Rowney masking fluid. You can kind of see them kind of like as creamy splotches on the page, and they kind of just protect the page underneath so that I can do watercolor washes over them. This time round I've been inspired by Hey Color on Instagram, and she does some amazing progress videos, and I'm always really fascinated watching her draw. So this is this is based on one of the drawings that she did earlier. I'm going to link that in my bio below, and if you're not following her, you should, because she's absolutely fantastic, and I just love watching the drawings come together. So I was recently inspired because I backed her Kickstarter, so I've been watching her page with a lot of interest, and she shows some really awesome techniques. So the one I'm doing this time round is I'm using the masking fluid to show a little bit of rain through the page. I'm using the Pentel Pocket brush pen this time, and I'm using that to ink everything, and that's what I normally do, but I'm going to use it a little bit more heavily than I normally would if I was on my LT, and that's because on the Archer and Olive I can be quite heavy-handed with it, and it just doesn't bleed through because the paper is just so thick. So I've been having a lot of fun just using this notebook, because I can kind of just abuse it with supplies, and it just holds up so well. The only thing about it is that it's very white, so I'm kind of getting used to the fact of how white it is, and the paper is a bit different to how I'm used to with the LT, because the LT is quite heavily coated, so the paints kind of sit on top of the page, whereas for the Archer and Olive they sink in a little bit, so you have to adjust your painting technique a little bit. But for those of you who are coming from traditional watercolors, the Archer and Olive acts a lot more like a traditional notebook than the LT did, because you can still blend over the grain, and the thing is sometimes the grain of the paper actually shows through as well, so you do have to do a couple of layers before it becomes really bright, because the paper does still show through. So that's just something to consider when you're using the notebook, and I don't mind that much because it means you paint a little bit more traditionally and you slowly build up your layers to make it what you need it to be, and it also means that you can add more subtlety in layers as well. If you look at my previous Plan With Me video for October, you can see me laying down big washes of color to tint the entire drawing, and you can do that really well with the Archer and Olive, but I wouldn't do that with the LT because I think it would buckle too much, whereas this notebook holds up pretty well to that type of technique. So the Pentel Pocket brush pen that I'm using, it has little nylon bristles at the end. So the thing is, it's a very sensitive tip. So when you're painting with it or drawing with it, you might find that it's really hard to get really straight lines. And it's taken me a lot of practice in order to achieve that. So I've heard a lot of you ask about that. And that's probably, it's just a little bit harder to use. And I find that if I hold the pen a little bit more vertically, it's a bit easier for me to control thinner lines. So that's just something that you might think about, but I would just practice with it first, just practice drawing strokes. Otherwise, if you want a little bit more control with the pen, you can use something with a harder tip like a Micron or a Faber-Castell pit liner, and that would give you a bit more control. You just go back over it afterwards to give some variation in the line. A lot of comic book artists use something like the G pen nib, which is a dip pen nib, and that might work a little bit better as well, because the spring there is you have to apply a lot more pressure to that, and that means that when you do press down on it, it does do the variation, but because the tip is a lot harder, you have a lot more control, whereas this is quite delicate. But it does mean that you can see what I just did there. I can just color the entire thing because the bristles do spread out so far. What I'm doing now is I'm just kind of just making a little palette of colors first. I'm just going to tone everything with like a grassy green or a sap green. I'm mixing those two colors together. I'm using the Holbein palette this time around because I kind of use that palette when I'm feeling a bit lazy, because there's already 36 colors on there and I don't really have to do a whole lot of mixing, because you can kind of just pick the color, which is really good if you're not quite sure. I guess the benefit of having a palette with a billion colors in it is that you can just pick it, and if you're worried about, you know, doing large areas and you haven't mixed enough paint, the color's already there for you just to use again. But it has been a bit of a like a change in thinking for me, because I previously used on my Daniel Smith palette, I only have 17 colors in that, and 3 of those are just pre-mixes. So I think that's like 14 colors that I actually have, and basically I got really used to mixing colors with that palette, so I feel like a little bit luxurious and lazy when I'm using this. It's been fun, but I think when you're starting out, it's really good to have a limited palette, because it really helps you understand colors and color families, just having to mix your colors all the time. I think you could probably do most of it with 12 colors, so I'm probably going to try and do a few videos for you guys in the future just using 12 sets of colors. I've also had a lot of you ask me about the quality of watercolors. Some of you have said that your paints are really chalky, and normally when it's really chalky it means there's just a lot of filler in it, like a lot of white paint or filler just to pad out the pan, and then it's quite opaque. It's not opaque because the pigment is opaque, it's because it's added filler, and you normally find that in like the starter kits or the like the non-artist grade paint. So that's just something to think about. And the other thing is you just have to kind of let your paint dry in between if you guys are closing your book. And if your book isn't as well coated as the Leuchtturm or as thick as the Archer and Oliver, your paint might actually seep through a few pages, and it might make a few pages stick together. So that's just something that you have to be aware of, and just be aware of the limitations of your materials and just work with them. Don't try and fight them or get them to do something that they can't. So it's just kind of like getting used to how your materials work in any given time. So it's like how I know that I can't paint this way on the LT because it will bleed through or buckle, but I can do it here. So what I've done is, because I've kind of just shaded the center part black, and this was based on the drawing that Hey Color was doing as well, it means that it kind of adds some depth to the picture already, and I'm kind of just adding the soft green wash all the way around. And what you can see me doing now is just going back and darkening some of the areas. So to darken the paint, I just dipped my brush directly into the pan to get a little bit more pigment in my wash, instead of just, you can see me mixing it on the side sometimes when I want the, so the paint ratio is a bit higher. A lot of you guys sometimes ask me what the perfect ratio of paint to water is, and it's really dependent on what you're trying to do. So the more water it is, the more watery the paint comes on the page. And also it's just dependent on your paint quality as well, because some of them you only need the slightest touch and they're super pigmented, whereas a few of the other paints you need to work it up a little bit more before you get a lot of pigment on your brush. So there's no perfect ratio, unfortunately. I'm using a mixture for the mushrooms, using a mixture of the Holbein paints as well as a couple of the reds that I was given on my sample card from Peppercon, and I've been really I've been like on a handmade watercolor binge. So I've just been ordering a lot of them. I've just had so much fun just learning about pigments. So you'll see me try and use a little bit more handmade watercolors in the future as well, because it's just fun and I love just collecting art supplies. Like, someone help me, my house is overrun, but that's fine. Moving on to that, I drew a little grumpy Humphrey sitting under the giant mushroom. I mean, I hope he doesn't lick the mushroom, because I feel like a mushroom that large is probably not unpoisonous, but I've given him a little grumpy face, because I find that the little British short hair face is always a little bit grumpy, and I do like to sneak my cats in every now and again, and the grey cats are always Humphrey. What I'm doing now is I'm just adding a little bit of white gouache just to do the little dots. I mean, you can do this as well just by doing the masking fluid. I made a little bit of a mistake at the beginning, because the brush I was using for the masking fluid, I used it to texture a giant miniature that I did recently, because sometimes I make some miniature sets for TV ads and that type of stuff, and because I used the brush in such a stabbing motion over a large area, it kind of just ruined the bristles, but I forgot that that's what I tend to use for my masking fluid because I don't want to damage my normal brushes with masking fluid. So it's a bit more splotchy than I'd hoped. Not much detail, so I will have to replace that going forward. I'm using the Tombow Fudenosuke hard tip pen now to do the lettering, and as you guys can see, I have slowly gotten better at lettering with my page 90 degrees to myself. In my early videos, you always saw me rotating the page because I struggle to draw, but I learned and I practiced for you guys. I wouldn't give you like dizziness as I rotated the page as I drew, so slowly getting better at that with that as well. So that's the finished spread for this week. I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys next week. Thanks, bye!